get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ada Recinos from Amazon Watch. So we're here today to explore the shocking fact that 2/3 of all oil exported from the Amazon is going to the US and primarily California. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to go through a couple of logistics. We will be having interpretation available. It should be available at the bottom of your screen. You should be able to select it and select the channel that you would like to listen to. If you are on the original audio because you can understand English and Spanish, you can also choose to go into either of those channels and mute the original audio. We also have the Q&A option available for you where you can post questions on there and we will get to those at the end of the presentation from the panelists. If you need closed captioning, that is also available. Please feel free to select that. If you need any assistance at any time, you can go ahead and send us your questions or concerns in the chat and we will address them. Thank you so much. So in light of the Russian oil ban and planned oil expansion in the Amazon, this issue is very pressing, more and more each day. Today, we will hear perspectives from Indigenous leaders, elected officials, and from Stand Earth and Amazon Watch about this critical issue. As we head toward the Summit of the Americas, our hope is that this information will spur action in California and an end to the US and California complicity in new oil drilling in the Amazon rainforest. Today, we will be hearing from Indigenous leaders, including Andres Tapia, a representative of Pan-Amazonian organization Cueca, and Confeñay. We'll be hearing from Nemo Andy Gikita, a Confeñay and Waorani leader. We will be hearing from Tyson Miller, Amazon Program Director at Stand Earth, and Kevin Koenig, Climate and Energy Director at Amazon Watch. We will also be hearing from two elected officials, Daniel Lee, Mayor of Culver City, and Andrew Lewis, the VP of the City of Los Angeles Neighborhood Council. We're going to get started with the Indigenous leaders' perspective. Nemo Andy is a Waorani and Confeñay leader, and they will be talking about their experience in the Amazon. Thank you.
Buenos días a todos.
Good morning with everyone. To everyone who is listening to us, my name is Nemo from the Waorani nationality. I am the Director of Women in Health in Confeñay. It's an organization as 11 peoples in the Amazon. I want to tell you what is happening in our Amazon. It is very lamentable what is happening because the spill not just affects the life of humans who are in the jungle, it also affects the animals. First of all, because the spill directly affects our communities, because the rivers are our main source of life. What's happening with them? They're being contaminated by the spills and we cannot consume the products of the river. We're drinking this contaminated water. Our fish are dying. The animals are dying. The jungle is dying because we cannot cultivate our foods. All of the spill in the jungle is having an immense negative effect on our lives. It also directly affects our health. We have respiratory problems with our grandparents and our children who are in permanent contact with the rivers, with the jungle, with the earth. The women have many diseases on their skin. Likewise, we have eye problems, visual problems. We have many issues that are happening in our territories due to these oil spills. Likewise, in our territories, the vulneration of the rights of the Indigenous peoples, our rights are not being respected. Just more decrees are created for more companies to enter our territories and to continue extracting crude oil in our territories. Historically, we are being affected by the governments. This is well known as the crude from the Amazon is constantly extracted. The Indigenous people are the guardians the protectors of the Amazon and the jungle, but it is being destroyed. The governments are giving permits. The great banks are financing this extraction from our territories and causing enormous damage for us in the Amazon. Likewise, we as Indigenous peoples who are at the front of this fight are persecuted by politicians. Many of our activist leaders are imprisoned. Sometimes there are disappearances of our leaders. Likewise, as leaders who are at the front doing activism in our territories, making our voices be heard, we demand that the crude oil in the Amazon be reduced to the state of California. The governor has to help the fight with the Indigenous people. They must look back and see what's happening in our territories. Our territory is not an oil well for the governments. It's our life. It's our home. The Indigenous people are working, and we're against everything for they leave the crude oil in the ground. We demand for our rights to be respected. We invite all the authorities of California or the great banks to please visit our territories and see the realities of our territories, to see the damage that this extraction is causing, this enormous damage in our territories. As leaders and as youths, we are fighting for our earth because we want it to be conserved. We want the spirit of our jungle to continue living, that the fight of our grandparents and of our parents to be respected, and we as children will continue in this fight as guardians of the jungle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nemo, for sharing your experiences. We are now going to hear from Andres, who is representing Coica. Thank you, Andres.
Muy buenas tardes. Queremos saludar a
Good
todos.
afternoon. We want to greet all the representatives present from the state of California. For us, it's very important to be able to share the reality that's being lived. And I think Nemo, the director of Women of Confiña, has given an excellent context of the reality that unfortunately all the extractive activities bring as consequences to the indigenous territories of the entire 9 countries of the Amazonian basin. In view of this reality that we have constantly denounced, the organizations, we have not just announced, we have proposed. We have made proposals, comprehensive proposals that seek to visualize the alternatives that has to do that we must conserve 80% of the Amazonian area until 2025. It's an innovative proposal that COICA is spearheading and has received the support of the organizations of civil society, of the organizations that work for conservation of the environment, but likewise of various states and various governments, as it was proposed in the Congress of Protected Areas and Forests held in France in Marseille a few months ago. Likewise, it is a proposal that has been well positioned and proposed to the world in COP26 in Glasgow. And the structure of COICA in the 9 countries have backed this proposal. It encompasses all the alternatives to, in a sustainable and balanced way, mitigate the impacts of climate change. And this is a counterpart of the aggressive politics that our governments have proposed in increasing extractivism in the Amazon. In view of this, we seek for the engagement of the governments of the states, in this case, in the government of California, because it's one of the governments that's in one of the top 10 economies worldwide. And unfortunately, as it's such a strong economy, the commerce of oil that is financed through North American banks, European banks, the issue that this has is it causes increase in extraction of petroleum in the Amazonian areas to which Nemo referred. We invite the California government to listen to our proposals, such as the 80-25, so that the governments can take into account the alternatives and the proposals, the friendly proposals that we have for the environment, and to stop financing extractivist activities that just bring death. They will just bring the extermination of indigenous people and voluntary isolation, and it will bring more marginalization for the indigenous peoples where mining and oil activities take place, and they should join the activities that we have proposed, the territorial proposals that are in this 80-25 proposal, such as the life plans of the nationalities, the proposals for conservation of the indigenous territories that have been proposed, and in many cases have support from local governments. Very powerful governments can adjust their plans to these proposals to protect biodiversity, ecotourism, and to strengthen the organizations that will help us to go through an extractivist process to a post-extractivist activity. This is seen in California and also in worldwide in the events, in the Biodiversity Summit, the COVID, and different events. Is more imminent than ever, the need to abandon the use of fossil fuels and to go to new forms of development that contemplate our reality, and that will help us to guarantee the survival of the lives of indigenous people, not just the survival of the peoples who live here, but also is for the survival of mankind, for the balance of our planet, because or else we're at a point of non-return in which if we don't make decisions right now, it will be too late later on. We cannot go back, and we will be condemned to extinction as a human race. Thank you very much.
It is very important to lift up this global initiative to protect 80% of the Amazon by 2025. We will now be hearing an overview of key crude oil supply chain findings from Stand Earth. Take it away, Tyson Miller, Amazon Program Director.
Great. Thank you, Ada. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Okay, wonderful. So I'll be giving you a sense of the crude oil flows from the Amazon to the US and California, and getting into some of these findings here, the key takeaways. Relative to California consuming 50% of all global consumption of Amazon oil, which essentially means on average 1 in every 9 tanks of gas in state. So quite shocking, really. And California is one of 10 states in total that is refining oil from the Amazon, including refineries in President Biden's home state of Delaware. This research was conducted by Stand Research Group, a research unit of our organization, in partnership with Amazon Watch, and it was released to the world via a report known as Linked Fates, which is on both of our organization's website, and was covered in depth by NBC News, and it had over 100 stories with about 180 million global reach. That was in December of this year. Since that time, we've been really trying our best to make this problem more visible with government officials in California and to try to catalyze action, and that's still very much in play, the need for action. As mentioned by Andres, what's really something that's quite amazing and in play is that there's a greater recognition globally of the need to protect 80% of the Amazon by 2025. This was motion 129 passed at the International Union for the Conservation of Nature World Conservation Congress. This is really where we need to be going, and sort of reinforces that the critical need to not be opening up the Amazon for more drilling and more extractive industries. We need to be keeping what's currently intact and expanding indigenous lands and territories. And so this is much different than existing policy frameworks that are out there calling for 30% protection by 2030. That's great for the Amazon. It needs to be 80% by 2025. One thing of note is that citizens, when we did citizen polling through a major firm that polls for all the networks, to check like resonance about this issue and our citizens' concern about this. And the data is really interesting in that 2/3 of folks in the US are concerned about the US being, in California, one of the largest consumers or the largest consumers of oil from the Amazon, 2/3 being more likely to vote for elected officials who have taken action on this critical issue, and they may same number willing to make lifestyle changes and the like. So it's important for the representatives that are on this call who, this kind of citizen attitudinal information is important for you all as it relates to what priorities you make. I will say that there is pressure growing in California to sort of take action on this critical issue of keeping oil in the ground in the Amazon, and also not expanding drilling domestically in California. This pressure, the citizen pressure, is only going to keep increasing in the coming months and years. So this is kind of a beginning of a rundown of sorts that will give you a sense of where the crude flows are coming from. But essentially, Ecuador, there's a huge proportion of the oil that is exported to the United States coming from Ecuador, but Peru and Colombia are also countries in the Western Amazon supplying crude for the US and California. So it's a massive number. So in 2020, at least, we're talking about 70 million barrels of oil coming into the US from the Amazon, California consuming about 55 million to 56 million of those barrels. There's likely more. A lot of what's there for Panama is actually likely also coming to the States as well. And then you can see some other countries, Chile, China, et cetera, also consuming oil from the Amazon. And we'll get into the other states that are implicated as well. So as I mentioned prior, almost 50% of global crude exports going to California, just a massive number, and 17% going to other refineries in the US. There's some variation in terms of what that might look like, different parts of the state, but on average for the whole state, that's 1 in 9 gallons. And in Southern California, where I'm originally from, it's 1 in 7 gallons, so incredibly troubling. Large proportion of what is put in California resident and business tanks coming from the Amazon. And this is a steady trend as well. So this gives you a bit of a snapshot from 2014 through 2020. California is in pink. You can see that those numbers are substantive. In 2020, what was surprising as well was that Ecuador surpassed Saudi Arabia as the largest foreign source of crude oil. So a major issue in play, and we'll be hearing a bit more from Kevin about what is in play in Ecuador that's even more troubling than the existing crude flow dynamics. That's just another snapshot that shows how the state stacks up against the other largest consumers. And you can see the dark blue, the US representing just a huge proportion, 2/3 of what it exports. In terms of from a refinery perspective, the top 3 refineries in general, and this column here, there's a lot of data, but this is the column you really want to pay attention to. So Marathon is a major top refiner of the oil. Marathon's Los Angeles refinery. And then if we get into Valero, that's these 2 refineries, the Wilmington and Benicia refineries, nearly more than 20%. And then Chevron, who has just an awful toxic legacy in the Amazon in Ecuador, that you can learn more about via varying sites that we can make sure get included and follow-up efforts. So these are the top 3 refineries refining oil from the Amazon. As was mentioned, there is some movement. There's been a lot of a range of banks as of late who have been making commitments that are involved in facilitating oil drilling in the Amazon, but also the trade of the oil, have been starting to make commitments that sort of line up with the International Environmental Agency calling for keeping oil in the ground if we're going to hit 1.5 degrees, but also in line with their climate and social policies on record. So of note is BNP Paribas, a major bank with billions connected to the oil industry in the Amazon, just recently made a commitment to provide no new financing for oil in the Amazon. And that's on the heels of ING committing to no fossil fuel financing anywhere globally, new financing. So these are some reference points. And there'll be some new research coming out later in the year that is tying more than 100 banks to oil in the Amazon. And we'll be focusing in a core way on Citibank, who has historically topped the list of one of the largest funders of oil in the Amazon. So that's a bit about crude flows. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Kevin Koenig from Amazon Watch. Actually, Ada, back to you to introduce Kevin.
Thank you so much, Tyson, for that overview. Next, we'll hear about threats on the ground and the urgent need to act by Kevin Koenig, Climate and Energy Director of Amazon Watch.
Great. Thank you, Ada. Thank you, Tyson. Thank you, everyone. We're going to jump right in. And I think what I want to do is just get everyone here a little bit closer to the ground and talk about some of the urgency that's happening in Ecuador around plans that the government of Guillermo Lasso has. And to talk about, to give a little bit more context and some examples and be able to actually show you some of the impact that oil extraction is having on the Ecuadorian Amazon and its people. So just, a lot of you all may know this, but a couple just important, I think, things right up front that I want to just emphasize here, right? Ecuador has a small percentage of the Amazon basin in general, but it is the most biodiverse, right? And therefore one of the most biodiverse places on the planet, right? We're talking about peak diversity of plants, mammals, birds, and amphibians. The Ecuadorian Amazon is also home, as Nemo and Andres mentioned, to 11 different indigenous nationalities. And there are two groups, the Tagaeri and Taramanani, who are living in voluntary isolation. They are nomadic and live within and around Yasuni National Park. And then obviously, very important as well for our conversations, and obviously you are all aware, but the other thing important about Ecuador's forests are the same, just like all the rest of the Amazonian forests and standing forests everywhere, is that they are essential for climate stability, right? So to get our bearings a little bit, let's take a look at this map. You're going to see a couple different maps throughout this presentation, but I just want to give, let's get our bearings here and orient us, right? This is Ecuador. The right-hand side, all those colorful sort of blocks looks like a kind of Tetris thing happening. That is Ecuador's Amazon, and it's sort of, you can divide it almost into two a little bit, right? The northern Ecuadorian Amazon, and you can follow Tyson's cursor up there. Those are these kind of light green blocks, right? This is where this is basically Ecuador's oil producing region, right? This is where oil extraction started back in the late 60s, early 70s with Texaco, and began, that was what started the oil boom, and it's branched out from there since then, right? So the two provinces up there, Sucumbíos, Orellana, the two provinces that are responsible for the largest amount of crude coming from Ecuador's Amazon. That oil goes into two trans-Ecuadorian pipelines, right? You can follow Tyson's cursor there. Those pipelines run hundreds of kilometers from the Amazon. They parallel the Coca River, which we'll talk about later, because and how problematic that is, because of aggressive erosion on that river has led to numerous spills. But they parallel that river, they go up over the Andes. They cross 91 fault lines. They cross 6 volcanoes on their way all the way to the coast and the port on the Pacific, where they head to the United States and California and elsewhere. On this map too, Tyson, you want to just maybe circle? You can see, for people, we're going to talk about it, but Yasuni National Park. It is right, you can kind of see Tyson circling it. There's a couple oil blocks that overlap it on the top. Below it is a no-go zone. We're going to talk about that for the Tagaeri Taramanani. And then all these blocks to the south, all the yellow blocks are all what is basically on the auction block. And that's what we're gonna talk about. We can move to the next one. So, as I mentioned before, President Lasso plans to, a big goal of his administration is double production, to take Ecuador from 500,000 barrels per day up to 1 million. He issued a couple months ago Executive Decree 95 that really lays the groundwork for a whole bunch of reforms that they hope will increase investment, right? They switched the contracts with companies from services contracts to production sharing and participation, and numerous other reforms that are in the process of being implemented. So a word about this new expansion, right? That Ecuador is planning, the doubling of crude. That means basically Ecuador has to do two things, expand production and look for more, right? But a couple of things to point out here, right? Ecuador's plans right now are inconsistent with the conclusions of the IEA Net Zero by 2050 report, right? Which found that there is no room for more production beyond fields that are currently producing, right? Also, almost kind of goes without saying, but new production, new exploration is also incompatible with the Paris Agreement. And on this map, yeah, I guess Tyson kind of laid it out there earlier, but I do want to show you here. Again, I want to point out Yasuni National Park, and you see some of those blocks, block 16, block 31, and block 43 all overlap the park. There are 8 oil blocks that overlap that park, and it is Yasuni where the government hopes to get the majority of new production, new crude into those pipelines and out to the US and California and beyond. So to just give people a visual, right? This is in a block known as the ITT, block 43, on the border with Peru. This is what it looks like, right? This is a photo taken by NBC crew a couple months ago. This is where the new crude from that is going to come from to double production, and that's going to come to California. Some of it already is coming. This is the block that I'm talking about, the ITT block 43. You can see here, we won't go into all the weeds here, but it's important to understand right now there's 168 wells. The plan is for more than 600, right? This directly overlaps with the buffer zone and the no-go zone area for the Tagaytay-Tatamanani, the 2 groups living in voluntary isolation. I mean, this is absolutely existential threat for them, right? To have industry continuing to encroach and getting closer and closer to them. I wanted to say 2 other things here quickly about Yasuni. It's not only is it a national park, yet has 8 different oil blocks that overlap it. It's a UNESCO biosphere reserve. It is really, this is the heart of the biodiversity, right? Where there are more tree species and shrub species in 1 hectare in Yasuni than all of North America combined. And some of you may recall this, but I want to just mention it here. Back in 2007, Ecuador did have a proposal to keep some of its fossil fuels in the ground. The reserves right here in the ITT was called the Yasuni ITT proposal. Lots of reasons why that proposal didn't work, but this is the area that we're talking about now. Drilling is moving ahead. One last thing here, the other plan recently announced for the area of Yasuni to meet this goal of doubling production is creating a mega block, right, of some of the blocks already in the park. That's going to mean new infrastructure. They're talking about a new 150-mile pipeline across those blocks, across Yasuni National Park, through the forest, to connect production from those well sites, get them into the national pipeline system, and get that oil to market. The other thing that's at play here is right, to be getting out to drilling all this new well drilling or new roads. One of those roads is at the doorstep of that protected area buffer zone for the Tagaytay-Tatamanani. This is the road that's underway so far. So another big component here that we're particularly concerned about is new exploration, right? Yeah, let's stay on this one for a sec, Tyson. New exploration, right? We're talking about these gold blocks in the bottom there, right? Up to 17 new oil blocks, 8.5 million acres. We think the bidding process and cycle could open as early as the 3rd quarter of this year. This is massive, right? This is the rest of Ecuador's Amazon. This is roadless area, remote rainforest, and all titled indigenous territory that will be, and as I mentioned before, this is new exploration. So obviously new production was incompatible with the IEA report and the Paris Accord. This is going in, doing seismic and looking for new reserves of crude that we cannot simply afford to use, right? Just a word too about those indigenous territories here, a little bit from a couple of years ago, but this map shows us those southern blocks and how they overlap with the titled territories of 7 nationalities there. An important thing, I think, for people on this call to understand is obviously this question of free, prior, informed consent. Ecuador's constitution only in the constitution recognizes consultation and not consent. There is no FPIC law. So a lot of the drilling that's happening right now on indigenous territory is happening without the consent of those nationalities. There was a recent court decision that set a new precedent that basically defined consultation that it needs to lead to consent. So that's historic. It's now precedent legally, but there is still no law, regulation, or policy about how to conduct a proper FPIC process. So plans to double extraction move into these territories to get this oil that will be destined here for us in the United States. There is no real mechanism right now for indigenous people to exert their right to consent over these projects. Touched on it before, but yeah, the issue of toxic legacy, and we mentioned those pipelines. Over the last 2 years, there have been 2 major spills of those trans-Ecuadorian pipelines due to this aggressive erosion of the Coca River. They have built 8 different variants, but all of those have collapsed as well. So, right now we're talking about close to 1 million gallons of crude went right into the river system. Obviously, there in the forest, you can see, major impact on indigenous people that live along that river, that are fishing and bathing and drinking. And there's no long-term solution, right? Like, you've got these 2 pipelines that are running all the way to the coast, and there is no solution at this point for a long-term reroute of those pipelines, right? So when you think about doubling production, that gets really scary because clearly the issue of pipeline integrity right now, there's real questions around, is it viable to continue to export crude through these pipelines? Also, beyond just those the trans-Ecuadorian pipelines, but actually out in the oil patch, right? Spill after spill after spill. You can see in 2020, the average was almost 2 spills per week. Petroecuador, the state oil company alone, is responsible for 130 spills over the last 3 years. There has been very, real questions and issues around proper remediation and compensation for affected communities. And these issues kind of go way back, right? We're talking about almost since the inception of drilling there. We've seen a real lack of environmental accountability and a sort of lack of political will or capacity of the environmental ministry or the industry to sort of take ownership and operate in a way that's environmentally responsible. Obviously, no surprise here though, but it is really tragic. Nemo talked about it earlier. It's tragic and it's criminal because you basically have all these spills happening on a daily basis to people that this is a rainforest, right? These are people that are living, as I mentioned, they're bathing, they're drinking, they're fishing from these rivers. They live amongst this infrastructure, as this picture shows, right? So you can imagine the kinds of health impacts that people are grappling with. Another major factor that we have to talk about here is deforestation, right? In Ecuador, the oil industry is a major driver of deforestation. This is a photo from Yasuní, right? This is what building those drilling pads it looks like, right? This is from a couple months ago. And there's been several studies that have really established this link, the causality between extraction, extractive industry, particularly oil, with deforestation. But we know that also often it is the oil industry and at this point as well the mining industry, but it's really, they go in first. They're the ones that, the tip of the spear. They are the ones that are going into the forest first, clearing it, building roads, setting up infrastructure, and then over time, that's where the illegal logging, regular logging, and we've got agribusiness, African palm plantations, et cetera, all move in afterwards. So real issue. And I think this last point is just a big one for all of us to think about. The fact this pursuit of new expansion and new exploration, new fossil fuel reserves, but that lie underneath standing forests. It's a 1-2 punch for the forest, right? To be looking for unburnable fossil fuel underneath standing forests, which are being felled. as we speak. Another key issue here to just highlight is what Nemo mentioned this earlier, right? But just the issue of rights defenders. This is from a recent alert from Amnesty International. There, obviously this is an issue across Latin America, but also, in Ecuador, there's, several cases recently of, 4 or 5 women who have been vocal critics of the extractive industry and the oil industry that have received death threats and intimidation. And indigenous leaders, as she mentioned, and Andres did as well, continue to be persecuted by the government for merely just exerting their basic rights. So I will stop there, but thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for the overview. Before we head into our next section, I want to encourage folks to please put questions in the Q&A box of it.
Ada, your signal may be getting, I think you're back. Sorry, we lost you for a second.
Sorry, everyone. We'll be starting with Daniel Lee, the mayor of Culver City.
So I'm just going to talk about some of the local solutions that we already have in play and their relationship to the world at large. When I was looking at the rundown today, I thought, how to communicate, very clearly why this should be important to everyone if they don't think indigenous sovereignty itself is important. And it made me recall the volcano eruption in Iceland like a little over a decade ago, and how it completely shut down air travel over the Atlantic. And, it just reminded us how very much we are connected to each other. In Culver City, we took a step to close down the Inglewood oil field, the largest urban oil field in the United States. Partially as a result of our efforts, LA County took a similar vote to close down the rest of the oil field and phase out neighborhood oil drilling. And a few months later, LA City did the same. And then a few months after that, the state took a step. I don't think the step is large enough, basically to not approve any new fracking permits after 2024, and to provide a pipeline to phase out oil drilling in the state by 2045. That's not nearly soon enough, but it does show you the result of action on the local level. Many municipalities like Culver City have taken similar steps across California, and each time they do, they send a message to the state government that says, this extractive industry is bad for our constituents, but also bad for everyone around the world. Also, sort of, not duplicitously, but a little bit hypocritically, California, of course, is investing in carbon offsets in the Amazon rainforest. And there is debate among environmental groups whether carbon offsets are worth it. For me, I think they're just another get out of jail free card. Carbon offsets and net zero basically allow companies to continue to pollute, to continue to destroy the rainforest for some type of offset and some other place. What we need are more comprehensive solutions that say this type of extraction, this type of degradation of indigenous land is unacceptable. We have the technology to run many of the things that we rely on petroleum and oil for, on solar, on clean energy. My city is also a member of the Clean Power Alliance. We have been for the last 5 years. And for the last 5 years, we've been getting our electricity at a default of 100% renewable, and not net zero, 100% renewable. The technology exists right now, and the more demand that we put into the market for renewables, the more the technology will become less expensive and will be able to expand exponentially. We have the right to live and breathe, but it's our efforts and it's our lifestyle in countries like the United States that have endangered the indigenous people in the Amazon. It is our responsibility to really be accountable for the actions of ourselves, mostly the action of our state and our consumption pattern, because it's incredibly unethical and unfair for us to burn as much carbon as we want and not face the consequences. We need to divest, of course, from oil operations in our pension funds. There's a bill SB 1173 in the California legislature right now, but we also need to invest in a clean energy infrastructure that will allow us to permanently break from fossil fuels, and that will affirm the rights of indigenous peoples and help to protect their land.
Thank you so much, Daniel. We will now hear from Andrew Lewis, the Vice President of the City of Los Angeles Neighborhood Council.
Hello, can you hear me? Fabulous. Thank you, and it's great to be here, especially along other esteemed panelists like my friend Daniel Lee, who's an absolute leader in this field. And apologies, my video's off. My laptop is not working as it should today. Okay, so I want to speak a little bit about, and Daniel touched on it, what's happening in Los Angeles. As he mentioned, LA is home to the country's largest concentration of urban oil fields. In LA, we joined our neighboring Culver City and unincorporated parts of LA County to roll back active and new oil fields. So what that did was the ordinance that was passed by the city council directs the city attorney to draft an ordinance that will not only prohibit oil and gas drilling, but also changes the zoning laws to make drilling illegal, which is a big part of actually getting that done and giving that teeth, if that makes sense. So there's a study that's been proposed to see how the city can legally phase out existing oil wells. Also, as mentioned by Daniel, the proposal builds off of a statewide proposition announced by California, I should say the governor, which seeks to do this statewide and beginning to ban the process of permitting new oil and gas wells within 3,200 feet of community sites, including homes, schools, hospitals, nursing homes, and daycare centers. Excuse me one second.
Seems like Andrew might be having.
Oh, sorry, I'm back. Sorry about that. Okay. So yeah, so it builds off of a goal set by the governor to end all drilling permits within 3,200 foot setbacks, and you know, that is quite ambitious. Whether it's realistic and going to happen, that's to be told. But you know, I think, as was mentioned earlier, California has a unique dependence on Amazon oil, right? It's concerning. It goes, I think, against our values as a state. And you know, as Daniel mentioned, we have to begin to rethink our use of these oils, but also you know, take a stance that those banks and financial interests that contribute to that are starting, you know, start to set their boundaries that they no longer have an interest in doing so. Last thing I'll say, or one of the few last things, you know, for California to refine and consume half of the Amazon oil is just absolutely, I think, immoral. We have to urge California to become a full member of the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance by swiftly phasing out oil and gas extraction and production in California. And I think as well, we can do more to pressure our governor, Gavin Newsom, to take more decisive action on this topic. He can publicly declare that the state of California opposes the expansion of Amazon oil production. Also, he could enact a policy agenda to ensure California is not contributing to Amazon oil drilling expansion. But also too, and I think was mentioned by other panelists, is beginning to work with Amazon elected and indigenous leaders to do this work. I think it's super critical that we work in partnership with the folks on the ground, as was mentioned. And I think by, you know, like what we're doing now in this webinar, bringing folks together to think about policy, to have these conversations together, is how we can get things done. You know, as Daniel knows and other elected officials, I think too often government works in silos, if that makes sense, and doesn't consider and have conversations directly with folks on the ground, which is why this webinar and meeting is so critical. And we need more of these, and, you know, bringing policymakers, bringing elected officials, bringing the folks on the ground together to talk about impacts, but also when it's time to craft policy, having that back and forth is critical. And I don't see enough of that happening. So again, this is why this, you know, webinar, and thanks to everyone for putting it together, is just so critical for bringing those facets together, because you'd be surprised, people in power, especially in California, have never talked to people on the ground about this topic. They've never had that conversation. I mean, they're aware and they know probably, quote unquote, the right thing to do, but they've never had those direct conversations. So we do need more of these. We need these at scale. We need these, frankly, across the country, but definitely in California. So glad to be here. And I am proud, I'll say, I am proud that I think our state is headed in the right direction. And I'll speak for City of LA, definitely following the leadership of Culver City and surrounding cities in doing so. So thank you, glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you to all of our panelists who provided vital perspectives on this issue. We're going to be moving over to questions. The first question that I have here is from Sarah Greenwald on IUCN Motion 129. What is the next step for this to become an official agreement? Does it include any consequences for signatories who do not later comply with it? Alicia or Tyson, which one would like to take on that question? Perhaps Alicia.
Thank you, Sarah, for the question. IUCN Motion 129 was the start of a process of a call that has been uplifted by the indigenous peoples and leaders from the Amazon. I wish there was a silver bullet, so it's one action that will lead us to getting an official agreement. But we also have to take into account there's so many already official agreements, like the Paris Agreement. At the moment, we are in the negotiations of the conference for biodiversity, trying to have to incorporate some of the language of protection to the Amazon in the post-2020 global framework, biodiversity framework. And so it's a process, and we're trying to create the enabling conditions at a global level and also at a national level. So it's not one way. So it has to go from bottom up and up to bottom, and it goes from east to west. And I just want to close in this response. There's an indigenous leader from Brazil that said, now is our home that's burning, soon it'll be your home. And so when we think about the consequences, I think it's all of us being accountable for what is happening. And if you take into account the fires that are happening in California that are similar to the fires that happened, especially in 2019 in Bolivia, 48 degrees right now in India, and all these symptoms that are showing all over the world, it's what this leader cautioned us a few years ago. Check. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alicia. So we're going to go into next steps. So what does action from why does action from California matter?
Happy to take that one on. And I know there's different parts of that, Ada, and perhaps I'll kick it to my colleague, Matt, to weigh in. But essentially with California being such a, half of all exports are landing in California. And as Andrew Lewis mentioned, clear, substantive, concrete statements first, decrying what's happening and calling attention to it, and setting goals for the state to not be complicit in new drilling is critical. It sends the right message to heads of state in Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, and beyond to look at other pathways, bioeconomic development pathways, ways to keep forests standing, and to uphold the rights of indigenous peoples in the process. So I'll stop there. And Matt, what would you add in?
Sure, thanks, Tyson. And thank you all for your comments. It was very educational. I think as Andrew Lewis and Dan Yali alluded to, there's a lot that can be done locally and statewide in terms of concrete policy or concrete policy statements. But I think one of the key needs is to really focus on where sort of the root of the problem is, who's making what decisions. And frankly, it's the oil refining companies that are making decisions about where and how much crude to source and to process without any direct regulation at this juncture. So as you take a look at what it would take to move away from increasing pressure to drill oil in the Amazon, we really need to take a look at how much crude the refineries are allowed to process and where they can source it from. Right now, Californian consumers, whether aviation fuel or gasoline or diesel, are using less than 75% of what the refineries process. More than 25% is exported from the state. So when we take a look at that question, it's like, why are Californians who live in the extraction zones, why are folks in the Amazon who are living in increasing extraction zones being forced to provide oil to California's oil refineries? It's not even going to the Californians entirely. So when we talk about moving away from Amazon oil, as Tyson pointed out, that's about 11% of what is refined in California. About 4 or 5% of what is refined in California comes from extraction zones near oil wells in California. Frankly, with different decisions about how we regulate refineries, we can actually obviate the need for any oil from the Amazon or from oil produced near oil wells in California and not impact Californian oil consumers. So I think we have an interesting challenge ahead of us in trying to identify which types of policies could regulate the throughput, we'll call it, of the refineries and how they source their crude. That's going to take some really, I think, in-depth understanding from either the assembly, state agencies, a commitment from the governor, any different way that we can to really understand where the mechanisms are, the levers that can actually impact that. When I say that, I mean the throughput of the refineries, and make sure that the choices they make about sourcing crude don't impact Amazon expansion. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you so much, Matt. The next question is for Andres. What does the planned oil expansion in Ecuador mean for the future of the indigenous nationalities whose territory overlaps with those oil concessions? Thanks, Andres.
Sí, muchas gracias por la pregunta. Bueno,
Thank you
realmente
very much for the question. All actions that are taken globally, in this case, in the developed countries and with strong economies, and behind this California government, have a direct impact in countries with developing economies, such as the economies of the South, in this case, for the Ecuadorian economy, but not just for the Ecuadorian economy, but for all Amazonian country economies. Any decision to amplify extractivism directly affects negatively on our territories. First of all, socially, they generate social division, internal organizational conflict, in cultural issues. Likewise, loss of our culture, assimilation of Western customs, and the loss of the Indian culture, and an endless amount of social problems, alcoholism, prostitution, drug addiction, and many things that we're always already living through with mining, open sky mining in various countries is currently facing when the decisions of the Western world take, and for banks to continue funding this type of actions has a direct effect in social organizational processes of the organizations that are part of the structure of each country. In the case of Ecuador, Confinay, Ofiaca of Colombia, and each country that are the structure of the indigenous movement, Coica. Likewise, in environment, the effects are even more drastic because, for example, in the case of the Ecuadorian Amazon, we have a statistic that says by week, there are 2 oil spills per week. We're talking about a very high amount, which the contents of these oil spills go directly to the water sources used by the countrymen and indigenous people. In the levels of cancer are the highest that exist in the entire country, in Ecuador in this case. But the affectations of the environment due to the high levels of toxicity of the hydrocarbons, these are spilled in the rivers. In a recent trip that we had, we were able to evidentiate in the high contamination of the Coca River, over 6,800 barrels were spilled in these rivers that go into the Coca River, and these feed the Marañón and the Amazon. So the environmental impacts in this case are astronomical. We have not been able to determine by science the exact effects or long-term effects of this contamination in the middle of a health crisis that we're living through. A triple pandemic, which is extractivist pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and likewise historic marginalization that we have had in the indigenous communities. The effects are thus catastrophic.
Thank you so much, Andres, for your points. We are going to close out for the day. We want to encourage everyone to please be in communication with us, send us questions if you would like to get involved, to explore how we can call on Governor Newsom to end their complicity, our state's complicity on Amazon crude. Please join us. So be in touch. We can have all of this information available for you, the presentation as well, after the event. Thank you so much for joining us, and take care. Have a great rest of your day.